Now let's have a look through today's newspapers. And Alison Sargent is back with us on set today. Alison, you're going to start with one of the day's top stories, Donald Trump's second impeachment trial. The papers are kind of starting already to build up anticipation, aren't they?
Yeah, no, they really are, Stuart. It's on a few front pages here in France. We see Donald Trump here on the front page of Libération. And the French papers generally do not think that this trial is such a good idea. France's Catholic paper, La Croix, writes that in a country as attached to rule of law as the United States, well, it's not surprising that the desire to judge the former president is strong. Still, the paper wonders in its editorial if this trial is really worth it. They say first, because it will likely only reinforce the dedication of Trump's supporters who will see it as politically motivated. And then most importantly, because the paper says it really takes the country's attention away from much more important matters like the coronavirus pandemic. Over in the U.S., the conservative Wall Street Journal is making a pretty similar argument in their editorial. The paper writes that the irony of this trial is that Republicans really want to move on from Donald Trump and his legacy, but Democrats are not letting them. According to the Wall Street Journal, that's because Democrats have prospered under Trump and want to really keep him around to keep dividing the Republican Party.
Well, Republicans are undeniably divided, and Alison has also pulled out an editorial. It's written by a Republican lawmaker. It argues in favour of the impeachment trial.
That's right, Stuart. This was written by a Republican, but I should note that it does appear in the left-wing Washington Post newspaper. It's also worth noting that the author, Adam Kinzinger, is a representative from Illinois, which is a blue state. So he, as a Republican, is probably a little bit less in danger of alienating his voters. And indeed, he writes that he's heard from some of his fellow Republican constituents who say they really appreciate his effort to return the party to, quote, a foundation of principle, not personality. And he quotes Winston Churchill, who said those who fail to learn from history are condemned to repeat it. He argues that this trial is not a waste of time. It is a matter of accountability, and Republicans need to go through with it and impeach the president. The thing is, though, with few Senate Republicans supporting impeachment, well, it's unlikely to actually end in any accountability. This cartoon from Bill Day, also published in the Washington Post, references the famous line of O.J. Simpson's lawyer, if it doesn't fit, you must acquit. And we can see that much like the former football star, well, it looks like Donald Trump is going to be let off the hook. As we see in this cartoon, that overwhelming evidence makes the glove too big for his tiny hands.
Does have tiny hands, doesn't he? Donald Trump, not the only political leader on trial these days, of course. A politically tense trial also underway in Israel. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu appeared in court on Monday.
That's right. He appeared in court just long enough to deny the charges against him. Benjamin Netanyahu accused of bribery, fraud, and breach of trust. Now, the opening of this trial comes just weeks ahead of national elections, but the Jerusalem Post writes that this, quote, courtroom drama will have little impact on the vote. Now, why is that? Well, the paper reminds us that this saga has been dragging on in Israel for almost 5 years. They say most of Israelis have already really made up their minds what they think about these charges. Meanwhile, Israel's left-wing paper Haaretz argues that it might actually help Netanyahu. The paper writes, quote, being in the dock during an election, a victim of the, quote, deep state cabal of leftist prosecutors and journalists at the mercy of the distrusted judges might help galvanize right-wing voters to come out and vote for Netanyahu. Haaretz adds that Netanyahu even seemed pretty at ease when he arrived in court yesterday. They say, quote, behind his face mask, one could discern a smile.
Let's come to France for a few uplifting, that makes a change, coronavirus stories. First news that the oldest woman in France has survived the coronavirus.
She has, Stuart. This woman is 116.
160? Wow.
That'd be really impressive.
116 even is amazing.
Oh, still impressive. Okay. She's 116 years old.
Wow.
She's the oldest woman in France and in Europe, according to the HuffPost. She is a nun. You see her here. Her name is Sister Andre. She tested positive for coronavirus in January. According to French media, she has now officially been cured. The HuffPost writes that it's a symbol of hope in a difficult period. And it's also a lovely birthday present for her because she turns 117 on February 11th. So we'll have to think about Sister Andre this Thursday.
Oh, wonderful story. Finally, another uplifting story, at least a distancing one. This is the stir caused by France's health minister. He partially removed, it was sort of draped wasn't it, Alison?
It
His shirt to get a coronavirus vaccine on live TV.
Yeah, so he had to take off at least one sleeve, but he was very chaste about it.
Reminded me of Marianne.
People did make that comparison, because he was very careful to cover up the nipples.
Yeah.
It was a lot more skin than we're used to seeing from a minister. You can see an image of it here in this article from the French version of GQ. As you might notice in that photo, and a lot of people noticed, he's pretty fit. You know, he doesn't look so bad. GQ writes that Olivier Véran basically became the new figure of French bodybuilding. Olivier Véran's biceps immediately became a trending topic on Twitter. People were posting memes transforming him into Arnold Schwarzenegger. A lot of people were also joking that clearly the gyms have not closed for everyone. So it might not have been the serious pro-vaccine message the government was hoping for, but people are certainly talking about it. So maybe it was a strategy after all.
It's a bit weird. I mean, he doesn't have a belly, that's true, but I'm not quite sure it's like bodybuilding's. Anyway.
Well, maybe not in that. There is a moment, though, where he kind of looks down and seems to be flexing his muscles.
Alison's been watching this video on repeat, I have to say.
Don't tell them, Stuart.
Sorry, just did. Alison Sargent with the newspapers on France 24.